Hi, friends. This is George Latimer. I'm here in Washington, D.C., in my office in the Longworth building, and I appreciate you joining with me for this conversation tonight. This is the first of a series of dialogues that we're going to have, and they're going to be in different. I'm just checking the sound. I hear reverberation a few seconds after I finish speaking. We're trying to work through the technical difficulties, my friends. Hopefully, you can hear me. Okay. Hold on for a second, folks. Let's see if we can correct this, and we'll get. Okay, you take care of it. Take two. Can you hear me now? Hopefully positively. Well, good evening. Sorry for the technical difficulty. Every time you start something new, there's always something to learn from it. George Latimer, here in my office in Washington, D.C., in the Longworth building. Appreciate you joining us for this conversation tonight. This is the first of many such dialogues that we're going to have in a variety of different formats. This one involves a Zoom platform. There are limits to how many people can be on the platform, so I apologize for those who are unable to get on tonight. I think they're seeing this through YouTube, in addition to those who are on the platform. But we're seeing the number of participants rise, so hopefully everybody that wants to get on will be on. I intend to do a variety of meetings that will be in different communities. When you do something in person, wherever you place the event, you can't draw equally from all across the district. So if you're going to do it in one place, you need to do it in 5 or 6 or 7 places. And I've done this for years. For those who know of my representation in the county legislature, the state assembly, the state senate, and the county executive seats, we have these coffee and conversations all the time. But because of the unique situation that we're in, we're using this format the day after President Trump's State of the Union message, and try to have a dialogue on some of the major issues that people have written to us about. And then as I return to the district tomorrow and every weekend, we'll talk a little bit further. Let me give a couple of opening comments, and then we'll go to questions. Libby Carlson, my communications director, is here with me. She has gone through the many questions that have been received from a wide number of people, and she tried to cluster them into different topics so that we can address some of them. And we'll try to give you as much substance as we can. It's only been 9 weeks this Friday that I was sworn into office. And anytime you begin something new under normal circumstances, there's a startup time. It takes you time to get into our district offices, which we have in White Plains and in Co-op City, to hire staff. We're not fully finished hiring staff at this stage of the game, to get sort of the basic information down. Under normal circumstances, we've been making fine progress, slowly but surely getting where we go. I've been through this process already when I first became a state assemblyman and state senator. But this is no normal time. 7 weeks ago, Donald Trump took office, and good to his word in Project 2025, he has gone about the systematic destruction of the federal government in a way that people who've been here for 20 years have never seen before. So everyone is reacting to a situation that is unprecedented and is across all different areas of public policy. The executive orders that he issued involve the environment, social justice, services to seniors and veterans, foreign policy, housing, transportation, economic impact. It's the MAGA philosophy, which he campaigned on, and in essence, to eliminate government as we know it, and under the rubric of eliminating fraud, waste, and corruption, but in fact, trying to gut that which represents the government of the United States of America. And of course, as I'm new to the government of the United States of America and understanding the different operating departments, as a freshman in the minority, the Democratic Party holds a minority position in the House, in the Senate. We don't hold the presidency. The social media oligarchs have sided with the president. Fox News and some of the major media outlets are with the president. and the Supreme Court is with the president. So we're operating from a very difficult platform. Over the course of these 9 weeks, I've spoken on the floor of the House of Representatives. I've had videos which I've shared as much as I can to those who've expressed an interest. I've talked about my opposition to tariffs, what a terrible economic idea that is, that will throw us in a recession and raise people's prices and make it difficult for businesses to function. I've spoken out strongly on the Ukrainian crisis, that we have thrown under the bus democracy and joined forces with Russia, one of the great tyrannies identified by Republican as well as Democratic presidents as an unbelievable bad actor in the society. I've spoken about this GOP budget framework that was approved by the Republicans a week ago, and then also a variety of other issues. We've had a rally and a press conference pushing back on prospective legislation that would have voter suppression, and we find that to be objectionable. I've done events, 100 plus local events, League of Women Voters, the River Towns, Neighborhood Association in Glenwood Lakes, a host of Zooms with indivisible groups, Yonkers, the NYCD 1615 group, the C Co-Hope along the Hudson River group. We've had updates to different local elected boards and commissions, sort of a nonstop effort to be out in the community. Now, each of those events might attract 20, 30, 40 people. The Zoom with the Invisible is a large group. The Zoom with the League of Women Voters on the voter suppression bill got a large number of people. But nonetheless, there's any number of people out there who get their information. They can't get it from local media. Local media is much less prominent than it used to be, and they're frustrated. And what's implicit in some of the questions asked is a not knowing of the things that we've done, not knowing that we've spoken out on which issues and what we've done to try to get press attention on them. We've had a number of controversial votes in which the Republicans have pushed bills that they have long sought ideologically to pass. And I voted no on the Lake and Riley bill. Twice it came before us. And that's a bill that they say will go after violent immigrants, but in fact, the power to go after violent immigrants exists already. What they're trying to do is open the category for people that they can plausibly claim to deport. The Girls in Sports bill, which goes far too far in language that would create an inspection process by every school to determine the gender, the actual biological gender of a child participating in sports. The Born Alive bill, which is nothing more than an attempt to limit a woman's right to choose. The Fix Our Forest bill, which sounds like it's an environmental bill, and it's the exact opposite, opposed by the Sierra Club, opposed by the League of Conservation Voters. Bills that eliminated all of the Biden administration regulations on the environment. No vote on that. No vote to criminalize individuals who are fleeing from a pursuit, which was illegal pursuit. So no's on all of those bills, which represent what I believe to be the consistency of the constituents of this district. But having said all of those things, we saw a presidential State of the Union message last night that really was much more of a campaign rally speech. I am talking to you in a non-political governmental format. So some of the things I might like to say are not appropriate for a governmental communication as this is, but there are many other communications I'll have in which I can express my feeling about that. And what we're watching requires us to have a great deal of energy and a great deal of stamina, because it will take time for us to push back. The political power that the Republicans have accumulated is significant, but there are tools in our tool shed. We have the ability, and we've used it with allies, to launch lawsuits that have had the effect of stopping many to most of the terrible things that the Trump administration has done. We have upcoming a continuing resolution to keep the government open that we believe we'll be dealing with in the next 10 days, 2 weeks. And that is a tool of leverage, depending on how we use it and how the Republicans intend to use it. We have a debt ceiling debate that will come up, I believe, in the month of April. That is leverage, where Donald Trump wants to have greater debt ceiling so he can authorize a much greater tax cut for the very wealthy and the corporations. And we have the court of public opinion that can turn the tide on issues, because these congressional majorities are not large majorities. And if we can show that the voter suppression bill is not popular, if we can show that tariffs are not popular, we have an opportunity to turn the tide on something. So we're going to start talking about some of the issues that you have called in about or written about. Libby will ask some of the questions. I'll try to address. Now, there'll be other forums where people will get a chance to get up and say their piece. We know that there's a lot of angry people out there, but I would ask you to make sure that we channel our energy and drive into the things that will solve the problem, and not just express how we feel. I feel pretty angry too. I express it differently. Some of you will express it in language different from the way I would. But the bottom line is my mission is your mission. We want to stop this destruction of government, and we want to go back to the kind of progressive, positive things we believe in. That is how I governed Westchester County for 7 years. And that's in the books. That's proven. That's how I represented people in the New York State Assembly and Senate. That's proven. After 9 weeks, I'm in the process of doing that in the Congress of the United States. So with that, Libby, please let us know what some of the issues are. Will you be heard on camera from where you are? Okay, very good. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have a question from Andrew L. in Larchmont. He just signed up for Social Security, and so he's wondering what is going to happen for Americans who receive this benefit.
Okay, Andrew L. of Larchmont asked a question about Social Security. Correct. If he's just signed up, he's one of the 10,000 baby boomers, my generation, which is signing up for Social Security every day, 10,000 people every day. And, I first started to work full-time 50 years ago this year. In January of 1975, I had my first full-time job, and I made my first contribution to Social Security. Over these 50 years, I've contributed to the program, and this program right now in the district that I represent benefits 128,000 people. There's 770,000 people in the district, and 128,000 of them are Social Security recipients. And they have received these benefits because they have contributed into the Social Security fund for the same length of time that I have or thereabouts. With 10,000 new members every day coming in, this is a lifeline revenue stream for people. People of a certain age, Social Security is a baseline upon which they build how they're going to go into retirement. Elon Musk called it a Ponzi scheme. And I think this tells you that Elon Musk has no concern for average people. He lives in a different world, and he doesn't really care about how people who aren't as wealthy as he is operate. It's as much of a Ponzi scheme as how he's made his billions with perceived value on Wall Street that accelerates based on rumors and proximity to the president. Nonetheless, while we should be discussing what we're going to do with Social Security to secure the fund over the next 10 years, right now we're having to fight a rearguard action to stop a proposed 50% cut in Social Security staff. Now, Representative John Larson of Connecticut has drafted the response from the Democrats. I've signed on to that, and that has been sent to the Trump administration, pushing back on this cut of staff. We believe it's an illegal cut. He cannot eliminate staff at that level. And should that be implemented, we go to court. We go to court on a lot of things. So we've got a long list of litigation that we have at fingertip that we have gone into because we realize that he won't do these things voluntarily. A court will have to force him to do it. And we've had some success in being able to stop him. And this is one of the areas on Social Security where we intend to do that again. I would also mention that we've had a local battle over the closure of the White Plains Social Security office. Now, that's a hearing office. And that hearing office has 6 administrative law judges that handle challenges that individuals make to changes in their Social Security benefit that they want to challenge. And that office currently is 77 South Broadway. The owner of that building has indicated that they do not want to renew the lease of that building. And so the Social Security Administration announced they were closing the office and they were going to send individuals, instead of going to White Plains, to Albany, to New Haven, to the South Bronx or Newark, New Jersey, or Jamaica, Queens, to other alternate offices. We've said that's unacceptable. We have a bipartisan letter to protest this. And even more productively, earlier this week, I had a press conference with Ken Jenkins, Westchester County Executive. We obviously worked together for many years. Westchester County has found alternate space in White Plains for the Social Security office. It would cost the SSA less money than the private sector office. And now as we lay that before the president, it's not a question of saving money. It's not a question of having no place to go. It's a question of you maintaining a service that benefits people or your decision to hurt people with the decision to close the office. This is not the only office they're planning to close nationwide. We think we've made a positive case of pushing back on that, and we hope that that will turn the tide argumentatively. But if they go forward with these Social Security cuts, we go to court, and we also make the case in the court of public opinion. And I think with 128,000 members of this district and all across the country, those kind of percentages, the Trump administration and the Republicans who back him are going to run into very tough headwaters if they do, in fact, try to implement the 50% cut. We take them to court, we slow them down. We hopefully win at the trial level, as we had in other cases. and we push back on their efforts to eliminate Social Security. I believe they say they won't, but I don't believe what they say. I believe ultimately they intend to eliminate it. Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme tells you what they really think.
Next question is from Melissa B. in Port Chester. She's a federal employee who's based in Westchester, who's still in a probationary period. She has a question about holding Musk and Trump accountable, especially regarding how they've been treating federal employees.
Well, Elon Musk and his league of 20-year-olds who are coming in, they're simply trying to wreck government. They've made the argument somehow that they're going after fraud, waste, and corruption, and that's a crock. The bottom line is there waste in any department? There's some waste, no doubt. The way you go after it is to intelligently analyze the operation of the department, and you take time to understand how the proper operation is and how it should be. That can take you 30, 60, 90, 120 days, depending on the size, the scope of the department. I had the pleasure of running Westchester County government for 7 years. And we took our time looking at each department, assessing the personnel and the policies, and then making changes off of information. When you see someone comes out, as Musk has, and said USAID is corrupt and it has to be put in the wood chipper, that's not an analysis. That's not an assessment of corruption. That's a political ideology. And he's in doing this because he benefits if there's no government, if there's minimal government regulation. Then he can run his Tesla vehicles without anybody watching how many deaths might be coming from a Tesla vehicle, and on with his other holdings. And I think he has a willing partner with the president. Our representatives have opposed the IRS layoffs. We have Representative Deborah Ross taking leadership on that. I've joined on her effort to do that by calling for these to be responded back to. Congresswoman McIvy has drafted a bill. The acronym is the Merit Act, which involves reinstatement of employees that may be let go. And I've signed on as a co-sponsor of that. And we're pushing that bill. We have a bill that's been out there for a while that's supported generically by the AFL-CIO, but also applies in this case, which is the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate law. And Representative Donald Norcross of New Jersey, I had a meeting with him to go over that bill, and that bill is an important bill we put in to try to put some pressure on. We are trying to publicly identify those individuals once they have had action taken against them. When a person is still in the federal government, we don't want to put them in jeopardy by singling them out, because then the action will move toward them and take action. But where a person has been fired, we have a Share Your Story portal. And if anyone is interested, you can follow up. We'll follow up with email and give you that direction to public identify, and people who are willing to tell their story to the press. If they're comfortable doing that, that will help us make the case that this is human suffering that they're creating, not a more efficient government. And ultimately, we have lawsuits going. The American Federation of Government Employees and AFL-CIO, in the case of AFGE versus EZO, is suing Musk on these topics. And we believe that once again, and you're going to hear me say this over and over again, that the courts will, when they look at this objectively, will see that we're on the right side of this, and what Musk is doing is an overreach. I wish I could say we're going to go in and pull Elon Musk out of his position. He's an advisor to the president. That falls within the president's authority to have an advisor. It can be an unpaid advisor, but that advisor does not have to have access to data. That advisor does not have the ability to send out a letter and say you're fired if you don't respond to this letter.
Next question is from Allison in Terrytown, and she has a question about the power grab by Musk and Doge.
Well, it's an outgrowth of what they're doing vis-a-vis federal employees. First of all, Doge is, or I call it doggy, call it whatever you want. Government efficiency is an agency that's not been approved by the Congress. It's not been put with a budget in the Congress. It's an extra legal activity created by the president, but that has no authorized power from the Congress to go in and do these specific things. They're doing certain things that fall within the executive authority, and the overreach is why we go to court to try to pull them back. There's a bill that I've signed on to, co-sponsored, a large number of us. Haley Stevens' bill called the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, because one of the greatest fears that people have is that Elon Musk and his minions will have access to sensitive data. And once he has that, he'll know through his computer powers, how to manipulate that information for his his being. Now, it may be for his financial well-being. It may also be to stifle dissent. He's a person that's had no problem laying off 20,000 people in SpaceX and Twitter and his businesses. So he has no heart to want to protect government employees any more than that. But we put these bills in as a chit to show that we're pushing against the policy and making it hard for them to implement that, so that those who support the Musk strategy have a political price to pay. These elections come very quickly. A 2-year term, I've served them in the past. You turn around and the next election is at hand. And, the election of 2024 wasn't run with the promise that we're going to put Elon Musk in to fire people. It was won on a promise that will somehow make the economy better, even if they were inspecific promises. Now, 3 months after the election, 9 weeks into the job, Musk's work is a power grab, and we're trying to push back on it. Once again, we rely on the courts. And the two other tools that I mentioned earlier, I'll mention them again. It may be that the Republicans will need across the aisle support to do a continuing resolution to keep the government open, and they may need across the aisle support to raise the debt ceiling. I'm not prepared to vote to do either of those two things if they intend to continue their destruction of the federal government, and then they need our support to keep going. They didn't need our support to jam Lake and Riley down our throats. They didn't need our support to do the Fix Our Forest bill and jam that down our throats. So they don't expect to come and knock on our door to get support for the continuing resolution or the debt ceiling limit unless you're prepared to restore some of the things that you've destroyed.
Okay. Next question is from Betty P. in Hartsdale, and she's wondering about the future of the Department of Education.
Well, the Department of Education is in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. He's already said that he wants to destroy it. Linda McMahon, the prospective or incoming Secretary of Education, has no background in education. So I oppose the dismantling of the DOE. It generates $709 million in New York that benefits various school districts. And in fact, we've gone through the process. I've asked Dr. Rick Busen, who's a former school board member in the Blindbrook School District, to help us with this, to identify to each school district how much they receive from the federal Department of Education, so that we can show what the contribution of the federal government is to the education process. We know that the state is the major funder of schools, and your school taxes are a major funder of schools. But even in districts that are seen as wealthy districts, there is some role that the federal government plays. The Child Nutrition Act, as an example, so that kids have a meal if they don't have the resources to have the meal. Children with Disabilities Act, that's $488 million for the Nutrition Act. It's $507 million for children with disabilities. Those are areas of federal support in Title I that's important in the Department of Education. So we push back against it. The Department of Education was created with legislation, and so it's our position that it cannot be destroyed without legislation. Now, if legislation comes before the House and the Senate as it's constructed, there are Republican majorities in both houses, but that's where we raise the public attention on the issue. We make it harder for those members on the Republican side to go along with whatever Donald Trump asks for, because the people are pushing back on them with information and facts, and that's an important element to deal with. So the Department of Education has an important function. To go through it and to fine-tune it and to change programs and improve them is perfectly fine. But you don't do that with the destruction of the department. You do that with proper analysis of the department. I learned that not in government. I learned that in my business career. I spent 20 years working for subsidiaries of some major corporations, and I had bosses that came to me and said, you have to cut so much money out of your budget, show me the game plan. And I had to give him details and specifics about how I would do that, not just going with a meat axe and whack. And so it is not only an irresponsible act that they're taking, but it is also not something consistent with what the business community would consider appropriate.
Next question is from Alfred M. in West Harrison, talking about combating the MAGA budget and stopping congressional Republicans' cuts to SNAP, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Well, the Republicans offered recently a bill that was a framework for the budget, and it involved a significant cut in a number of different areas, $888 billion cut in the healthcare area. And while they do not mention the word Medicaid in the resolution, they put it in a category for those areas that are covered under the Energy and Commerce Bill Committee. And the Energy and Commerce Committee's component parts include Medicaid, and you're not going to cut $880 billion out of that budget unless you're cutting Medicaid. So by de facto, my friends are playing cute and they say it's not in the bill. It's the content that's in there. And by looking at that, we recognize what Medicaid does to benefit people all across the district, and then beyond that, $888 million in cuts. I may have said billion. $1 million of cuts is significant, and it will reduce the healthcare. And that impact is not just on the recipients. That's going to affect the hospitals. It's going to destabilize the financial structure of our hospitals. Some of them are hanging on a thread, and Medicaid is an important revenue stream in places like New Rochelle, Montefiore, New Rochelle, certainly in that portion of the system that's in Mount Vernon, and in the Bronx in the Montefiore system as well. 74,000 residents of SNAP, the nutrition program, helps keep people fed. We as a county government, when I was there, made investments in food insecurity through Feeding Westchester. This is an abandonment of the issues that relate to food insecurity in this MAGA budget. So I spoke about this. I gave a speech on the floor. I'm happy to share that speech. It's a 1-minute speech, so it's not going to take up too much of your time. We'll be happy to send it to you as an outgrowth of this, so you can see what I said and how I said it. And that speech was covered in some local clippings. Some of the local newspapers covered the fact that I had done that. And I think that's a step in the right direction. But that budget also has to go through the Senate. And the Senate has greater leverage because the rules of the Senate are very different from the House. They give more senatorial prerogatives to individual senators. There's a filibuster component. I'm learning the rules of the House. I certainly don't know the rules of the United States Senate yet. But there are opportunities that the Senate has to slow these things down. And again, tied into the continuing resolution, tied into the debt limit, they're not going to be able to put a budget together without our help at the end of the day. And we're going to hold out for the best possible situation we can get. And if we don't get that, we're not voting for it. And unfortunately, the results of not voting for the debt bill or the continuing resolution is also disastrous. But we're not going to endorse bad public policy because they put a gun to our head and said, you're the ones that are guilty. You're the ones that have passed bills with unanimous partisan vote. And if that's the way you want to run the government, then keep running it that way. When I was involved in both the state legislature and the county legislature, we never thought of it that way. We always reached across the aisle to try to find common ground. And if we could compromise and not compromise our principles, we could get bipartisan support on a large number of issues. That's not the way it's being played down here. It's a different game, and it hasn't taken me 9 weeks to figure that out.
Switching topics a little bit, almost a quarter of our questions were regarding the conflict in Ukraine, so I'm combining a few questions from Stephen D. in the Bronx, Duncan H. in Portchester, and Leslie D. in Irvington, talking about how disrespectful President Trump was to Ukrainian President Zelensky in the Oval Office. What can Democrats do about continuing aid to Ukraine? And what do you think about the president's behavior and how it's affected our reputation on the international stage?
I think of all the things that have happened, and there are things that affect us more directly, the potential cuts to Social Security and Medicaid. But the behavior that President Trump has shown toward Ukraine is both inexplicable and disgraceful. It's as simple as that. It's inexplicable and it's disgraceful. We have sided with one of the worst regimes on the planet in Russia against a country that is defending itself against aggression. The United States of America put its young boys overseas in France to liberate France from the Nazi monsters in the 1940s. We went into Kuwait to liberate Kuwait from the hands of Saddam Hussein. We had American boys and money to protect South Korea from the aggression of North Korea. In every one of those cases, America stood for democracy, not for totalitarianism. And Ronald Reagan, Republican president, called Russia the evil empire. That's not a Democrat. That's Ronald Reagan, who up until this president was the patron saint of my friends who are Republicans. They look at Ronald Reagan as an exemplar. They named the airport here after. Russia was the evil empire. George H.W. Bush said that Russia was part of the axis of evil. And now we're joining forces with Russia in the UN to vote for Russia against Ukraine. Now, no country's perfect. Ukraine is a 30-year-old, some odd year old democracy, which has work to do. We have work to do in the United States. Every democracy has work to do. But the effort to try to vilify Zelensky is just a way to justify Russia trying to subsume Ukraine back under their rule. They know that Ukraine has a great agricultural breadbasket, and they want to control that. And they want to completely control the land around the Black Sea. That's what they want to do. And that's why they threatened him. And they thought they'd go into Kyiv in a couple of days and knock him off. And then the Ukrainians stood up strong for 3 years. And now we're getting out of the business of helping Ukraine. This is a shame. And I think it's going to flip people who believe, oh, well, I voted for Donald Trump. He's going to make us strong and powerful. No, he's not. He's going to embarrass you by being on the wrong side of things. Consider this. And we'll probably talk about tariffs in a second or two. I know you have some questions on tariffs. We have slapped a tariff on our best friend, Canada. They're like our kid brother. They're with us in every single setting. And we slap a tariff on them to make a political point. We slap one on Mexico, too. We insult Mexico by saying, we're going to take the Gulf of Mexico and we're going to rename it the Gulf of America. We're going to say Canada should be the 51st state. What an insult to close allies. What an insult for the United States to threaten that we would take Greenland away from Denmark. If we need more military presence in Denmark, we could negotiate it tomorrow and have all the military protection we need in Greenland to help our national interests. We don't have to take it away from Denmark. That's embarrassing. Like beating up a little kid for his lunch money. That's your mindset. You have more power than that little kid. You're going to take the money away from that little kid. That's obscene. We ignore England, France, and Germany, our European allies. We threaten that we're going to extend tariffs to them. And when it comes time to negotiate Ukraine, they've contributed significant money to the defense of Ukraine. We don't want them at the table. It's going to be me and it's going to be Putin, and we're going to decide what happens in Ukraine. Let me tell you what happens in the world, and you know this to be true. You dump on your allies won't count on you in the future, and your enemies. Your true enemies are out there, including the supposed friend of Russia. And they will systematically pick up relationships that you have left on the side of the road. And it's someday in the future, it might be the distant future. I may not be here and Donald Trump may not be here, but you're going to need those allies and they're not going to be there for you because they don't trust you anymore. They don't trust that America is the shining light, the city on the hill. America is just transactional. This is some real estate deal in Manhattan. I'll give you this land, you give me that land, and that's the way this thing is going to work. It's a shame and it's an embarrassment. What I can do is to show support for Ukraine. A week ago Sunday, I called Father Kirill Angelov at the St. Michael's, the Archangel Church of Ukraine, Ukrainian Catholic Church, and I said, Father Kirill, I'd like to come and worship you, and I'd like to invite some of my friends. And I called Ken Jenkins, and Ken Jenkins says, yes, I'll be there. I called Mike Spano, the mayor of Yonkers. He said, yes, I'll be there, and he came. I called State Senator Shelley Mayer. She said, yes, I'll come, I'll be there. State Assemblywoman Mary Jane Shimsky, yes, I'll come, I'll be there. Ellen Hendricks, who's a town councilwoman with Greenberg and works with us, she was there. And we all came to worship with our fellow Westchester residents to show that we stand with Ukraine. And I think the drumbeat has to be as loud as it can be. There are certain things that a president can do in foreign policy, but at some point in time, he may need to come back to Congress for some of these things. And we need to make it clear that the majority of this Congress, maybe he has a majority of the Republican Congress, but he needs almost every single one of them to turn their back on Ukraine. And I think we can I think we can have some impact on that. But it's shameful what's happened, and it embarrasses me as an American who believes that the United States is always on the side of the right, or we try to be on the side of the right. And in this case, we're backing the evil empire. That's what we're doing. We're backing the evil empire.
We have a question from the chat. Linda in the chat was talking about the SAVE Act and whether it has passed Congress and what you've done.
Okay, the SAVE Act is another one of the Republican bills that they passed in past years in the House. When they did not have the Senate, it would pass in the House and it died. The SAVE Act, they call Safeguard All Voter something Act, one of those acronyms. It actually is the Stop All Voter Engagement Act. This is a voter suppression act. And what it says at 100 miles an hour, it deserves a longer conversation, but I won't take up the extra time. What it says is that every time you make a change to your registration, not just the first time you register, but any change you make in your registration, you need to go to the county department, the county board of elections in person and prove you're an American citizen as you make that change to your registration. If you change your address, you move from one part of Somers to the other part of Somers, you have to come in person, and you can't do it by mail, which you can do it by mail now. We want to make sure you're an American citizen. You have to prove it again. If you change your name, if you're married or you've just become married and you're going to take your husband's name, or if you're divorced and you're going to depart a name and go back to an earlier name, then you need to go in personally and do that. If you're a college student and you voted away at college and now you're coming back home to your parents' house before you find your job and your permanent resident, you've got to go in person and change it. And when you go in, your driver's license is not enough identification. You have to show your birth certificate. Now, you may not have been born in New York. You may have been born in some other state, and you're going to have to communicate in that state and get a copy of your birth certificate if you don't have one on you. I don't walk around with my birth certificate on me. Most people don't. They say you need a passport. Almost 30% of the people in this district don't have a passport. And certainly the less wealthy you are, the more poor you are, the less likely you are to have a passport. So you're telling somebody right off the bat that you're going to have a hard time proving you're an American citizen, and you're going to have to do that, even if there's no question that there's a challenge to your citizenship. Why? They want to make it harder for you to vote, so you might not vote. And then the other part of the bill they do is they put penalties on the election workers that if they don't challenge you voting, they can suffer penalties, which include the potential of jail time. Can you imagine those nice little old ladies that check you in and you sign your name and it looks like the way you signed your name every other time you voted 15 times? They are now under the threat of going to jail if they don't challenge you on your resident, on your, not just your residency, on your citizenship status. And all of this is to protect against illegal voting by people who are not eligible to vote. First of all, if you sign a document and you say you're eligible to vote, and you find out that you're not eligible to vote, you're already committing a crime and you suffer the penalty right there by signing the document. You could look at documents, do a spot check, and determine whether or not people are breaking the law without going through all this rigmarole. But you're going through the rigmarole for a purpose. This is the voter suppression bills, the way they have been done in Georgia, Texas, and in other states. But now they want to apply it in New York. They want to apply it in Massachusetts and California, states that will never do this kind of stuff. And they say it's for voter protection. Bull. It's not for voter protection. You have mechanisms that you can use right now to make sure that what little amount of concern there is can be corrected. And I'll give you the perfect example of it. We had migrant placements in 3 locations. They're completed now, in Yonkers, in Ardsley, and in White Plains. And they were there for over a year and a half through a number of different elections. Not one example of any of those people. We had at one point up to 500 people here. Not one of those people came in and tried to vote in the local precinct in White Plains or Ardsley, Yonkers. Not one. Not one. So what are you trying to protect? It's a theoretical fear that you're using to try to get voter suppression. So HR 22 is the SAVE Act. It was scheduled for a vote this last week, and it was postponed. Now, it could be postponed because of the budget. It could just as easily be postponed because we've raised a ruckus. We had a press conference and a rally a week ago. It'll be 2 weeks on Wednesday. The League of Women Voters had a strong position against it. The NAACP spoke against it. The AFL-CIO spoke against it. And we organized this. When people say, what have you done? How have you gotten things on? We organized that rally. 50 people in front of the Martin Luther King statue in downtown White Plains. We got press coverage on it. And we made a point of highlighting this issue. And the League of Women Voters did a Zoom that night with over 100 people on it, where we did questions and answers on the SAVE Act. So I think it will come up again. We're trying to make it hard for all the Republicans to vote for it. If you know a Republican, if you have a friend that's in a district with a Republican, communicate with and tell them that this is a major issue. You're going to inconvenience people for no reason at all. And just remember who voted for it when you have to take a day off of work to go get your birth certificate, and then another day off of work to go to the Board of Elections, however far you are, in order to change your mailing address, which you could have done by a card through mail voting like that. That's what the SAVE Act will do. And if people understand that, They'll tell legislators, Congress members and senators, don't vote for the SAVE Act, or we're going to vote against you.
Another question from the chat from Annie. She says that the economy is tanking and it's painful for a lot of Americans.
Well, that's true, Annie. And last night, the president said that we're having the greatest boom that we've ever seen in the history of America. His first 2 months may be the greatest beginning of any president in the history of America. I tend to think that Franklin Roosevelt saving the nation in the first 100 days in 1933 is the best example of saving the nation. And the work that Abraham Lincoln did over his term, what Theodore Roosevelt, and some of those people are Republicans and some are Democrats. That's the greatest presidencies we've seen at the outset. But quite the opposite. Annie is, I believe, in asking the question the way she did is correct. The stock market has dropped dramatically over the last couple of weeks. It is now at a lower level than it was on election day last November. Why? The fear of tariffs. They see, Wall Street understands and Main Street understands that tariffs will hurt the economy. It has a chance to jumpstart inflation. The whole premise that the president made in his campaign was that he could handle the economy better. And a lot of people said, well, he was president, the economy was good up to COVID. I guess he'll do a good job. He talked about levying tariffs, but nobody makes the connection. You have to understand enough of economics. Some people do, some may not, that a tariff is a tax that you, the consumer, will pay. It's not being paid by the leaders of the other countries. You raise the price of goods and you add a price onto it. But those are the goods that are being sold in your country, which means if you want to buy that good, it goes up. You say, well, isn't that going to benefit the American company? Because then the price is still low for the American company. They maintain it low because what always happens is a retaliatory tax. You've seen it already in the newspapers. Both Canada and Mexico are going to establish tariffs on us. And they are our two greatest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. You eat avocado toast, likely the avocado came from Mexico. You drive a car that's got parts in it built in Detroit, and parts in that car came from across the river in Windsor. And that's what's being raised with 25%. We've had speakers say that you're going to raise the cost of cars and trucks dramatically with this. You have energy that gets sent from Canada down into the state of New York. I met with some utility leaders the last couple of days who reminded me of that fact. You're going to raise the prices with tariffs. And when Wall Street sees that, they're smart investors. They're betting on inflation is going to rise. And so therefore, that's going to affect the way we operate in the market. So Wall Street knows it. Main Street knows it because they know if the prices go up in the stores on Purchase Street in Rye, Larchmont Avenue and Larchmont, if it goes up in the stores in Dreiser Loop and Bartow Complex and Co-op, then that's going to affect people's discretionary money, and they're not going to be able to buy the same things at the same level, and the economy is going to suffer from it. So the tariffs are the reason for it. We've seen a drop in the stock market. That should tell you that these are the smart people. The Wall Street Journal just came out with an editorial yesterday. If you haven't seen it, look for the Wall Street Journal editorial yesterday. They blast the whole idea of tariffs. I hope that public opposition will stop this maniac policy of imposing tariffs. It's a bad idea, and it's going to do nothing to help us and everything to hurt us.
Changing topics a bit, we have questions from both Rodman R. and Patrick R. They're concerned about the increasing rates for Con Ed ratepayers and what's been happening with that.
Well, the Con Ed, as all utilities, are regulated through New York State, the Public Service Commission. And I want to compliment our Senator Shelley Mayers, my senator, my portion of Westchester County. She's taken a lead, and the other senators and assembly members are working with her. Amy Paul and Steve Otis, Gary Pretlow, Nader Sage, Natalia Fernandez, Pete Harcum, Dana Levenberg, Chris Burke. All of them are working to try to get the PSC to step back from any increase in rates above and beyond what they have now, and then try to push for some plan that would roll back rates. There are things that the state may be able to do, and if they do it, it'll be the PSC action. It could also be what's in this state budget that they're working on that would provide some relief. And there's a number of different ways they could go. I trust their leadership and judgment on those things. I will tell you, I know I'm going back to the tariff argument, but not imposing those tariffs is a way to help the state legislators get it under control, because when we put more money on tariffs, that's going to affect Con Edison. And Con Edison is going to say, oh, we have to raise your rates even more. I sat down and paid my Con Edison bill just like everybody else does. My Con Edison bill was X $100 higher than it was the month before. And I looked at the amount of energy I used from this year to last year. They show these little bar graphs on the bill, minimal difference. And so we're all affected by it. I hope that we can take some action in the state. Now, let me tell you another thing. If we go ahead with the cuts that we're preparing to do according to the Trump administration, we're going to hurt New York State. We're going to hurt Westchester County. Westchester County has a balanced budget this year that didn't raise property taxes, and it has a reserve fund for a rainy day. And Washington is on the verge of creating that rainy day. And if they create that rainy day for New York State, it's going to put New York State in a tough spot, and then New York State won't be able to help with the offsetting of the utility costs, which they might be able to do with certain programs. So this is a situation where you have to work intergovernmentally to have an impact. And I hope we'll be able to make some progress on Con Edison. And by the way, it's not just Con. If you live in the Con Edison service area, it's a Con Edison bill. Ask your friends in northern Westchester, outside of my district, but not outside of my scope when I was county executive, up in NYSEG. There's pressure there. Central Hudson, above that, National Grid in other parts of the state. This pressure is everywhere, and the solutions have to be a more broad-based situation. If we in Washington were to focus on that problem rather than destroying federal government people, we would be doing the people's work, but we're not. We're doing the work of special interests that want us to do things that will put money in their pocket and not necessarily money in the pocket of the average person.
We have Stephanie in the chat is asking which committees you're
on. Stephanie, I'm on Foreign Affairs and I'm on Small Business. And obviously one very domestic and one foreign area. Foreign Affairs, I'm on two subcommittees, the subcommittee for the Middle East and North Africa, and the subcommittee for South Asia, which would be India, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Sri Lanka, and so forth. Obviously, I'm going to the globe and looking at places that were not part of my jurisdiction in either the state or the county government. And I've had the opportunity to reach out and meet with some of the prominent people already. I met with the ambassador from Kosovo here in Washington. I met with the ambassador from Pakistan. And I have similar efforts coming up with those from India and other North African and Middle Eastern countries. On the small business side, we've already filed our first bill that I sponsor, which just passed out of the Small Business Committee today. And the bill deals with a very specific thing about transparency and accountability for the federal government when small businesses are bidding for government contracts. And what happens is you put the government agency will put out a request for bids, and you put together a $10,000 effort, and then they cancel the solicitation with no explanation and no way to channel it back in. So that bill, I think, has a good chance of passing the House. That would be my first bill. Not bad for 9 weeks. And we had it on a bipartisan basis. There's some things we can do down here bipartisan when we want to. And as anybody who knows my background from the other places, other jobs I've had, is I will work bipartisanly on these things. Where matters of principle at stake, I'll hold to the principle. But where it's a matter of discussion, what's the most practical way to do a specific thing, we'll work cooperatively across the aisle. The most important thing is that we stay engaged and we don't vilify the people that we disagree with. There's a lot of that happens down here, and that stands in the way of us working on more things across the aisle. So small business, foreign affairs.
From the chat, we have Philip and JP are both asking about cuts to NIH funding and the effect of RFK Jr. on public health.
Well, the NIH cuts are horrific, just as the other ones we've talked about. I had the opportunity to tour Burke Center in White Plains 2 weeks ago. Rob Hawk, who works on my team handling the oversee of major issues, was with me on the tour. And we saw some of the research work that's going on inside of there that's designed to deal with people that have Alzheimer's, people that have lost vision or trying to regain vision, and the testing. And it's a level of science that I'm not personally familiar with, but I grasp how important it is and how critical it is for the National Institutes of Health to invest in that type of research, because we don't know what the end product is going to be. And no corporation is going to invest money to do that kind of research if they don't know that they're going to come up with a product that they can then market and sell profitably to offset the cost of the research. So it becomes a matter of public need, public health to do these things. And that's what the NIH has done. Once again, we think the across-the-board cuts are illegal. I have to go through my list of all of the lawsuits, and there's hundreds of them in here, about 75 of them in here, see which one of them governs that particular cut. And we believe that we forestall the cut and perhaps we win it in court and we make the case in public that, and I just use one example of an NIH one, there's hundreds more out there where these aren't bogus. One of the things that they do when they're trying to cut is they find one specific research project that sounds absurd, might be absurd, might not be the best use of your money. But they take that one example and they say, oh, you're researching the color of the eyeballs of a raccoon. And that takes $30,000. So let's whack out $9 million worth of funding because we have one research project that's questionable. Well, if you come in as an executive and you have people responsible, you say, listen, go through these contracts and look at all of them and come back with an understanding of what the purpose is. There may be a reason why we're looking at the eyeball colors of raccoons, maybe not, but at least let's understand what it is. And if it isn't, let's make sure that we don't continue those contracts. That's an intelligent scalpel way to go through a department. You take a meat axe against the NIH and you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You're going to stop dead in its tracks research that could come up with the next major cure for something. And it's essential to have that. As far as Robert Kennedy is concerned, I've been critical of him. You know, I knew him back in the day. 25 years ago, when I was chairman of the County Board of Legislators, I worked with him on environmental issues. But, you know, his ideas have morphed. I mean, he flipped on a woman's right to choose like that. And some of the things he said really falls outside of the mainstream. He was, the Republican votes put him in. And he's now the secretary of HHS. And we're going to watch the different decisions that come out. And we're particularly going to watch to see if his vaccine skepticism turns into public policy. There are certainly, you bring a new product to market, you should go through all of the diligence necessary to make sure that it's safe. And to the extent that you can improve that process, then I'm as skeptical as anybody else. Let's make sure we get the science right. But to question and undermine at some point in time, which he has at various times in his career, some of the stable vaccinations that have kept us safe is beyond perplexing to me. I grew up in the era when vaccines first started to become widely used. As a little kid, I didn't want a vaccine. I squealed when my mother took me to the doctor to give me a vaccine. And I got vaccinations for polio and for measles and mumps and whooping cough. And I remember I had a sheet and I had to go to school and I had to show it when I sat down in a room with people that I was vaccinated. Because if I was unvaccinated because of my own choice and I got those diseases, I might still be able to transport it to other children in the room. So we had to be vaccinated. All of my life, I've gone through those things. And then most recently, I take a flu shot. You've seen me do that on camera in my last assignment. Shot for flu. One time I took a booster shot for COVID and a shot for flu. I didn't care for it too much. My arms were stiff that day. But the proof of the pudding is I got a mild case of COVID once over the whole COVID outbreak. I haven't gotten the flu over the course of my time. And I'm just one person. We have saved generations from polio and smallpox from this. So skepticism on new products brought to market, skepticism about products that are proven science. I have a problem with that, but let's see what he does. He has the position. He's been given the position. He's been confirmed for the position. I wouldn't have voted for him, but he got in, and now we have to see how he performs. And if he performs poorly, we raise our voices against him.
Okay, I have a few more questions before we get to 7:30.
Sure.
Question from the chat from Anne Marie on the environment and protecting our parks and forests.
Well, once again, the Trump administration is doing a 180 on environmental protection. He eliminated in one of his executive orders all of the Biden administration orders that protect the environment, all of them. He eliminated all of them. He pulled out of the Paris climate accords, pulled out of it, doesn't want to be a part of it, doesn't want to make commitments on reducing greenhouse gases. He had an EO that basically put a bullet through the heart of the renewable wind energy component. When I talked to some of the folks in the utility, they said, well, we have a wind project and that's probably the last one we're going to get because of what the administration has done. And I think his philosophy has been summarized very clearly by what they chanted at one of the conventions a few years ago: drill, baby, drill. I believe he and his administration are committed to fossil fuels. They have the economy of Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana. Many of their prominent supporters are from there. They get financial benefit from there. and they're completely committed to going back to fossil fuels. And what I'm concerned about, and we'll see how we can handle this, is that he's going to want to drill in sensitive areas of the environment, drill in the Arctic shelf, drill offshore, and the potential environmental disasters that could come from that. They'll call it American energy independence. But what they really mean is American dependence on fossil fuel. And I cannot believe that there's still people that are climate change deniers. We face a threat over time. Now, given my age, I probably don't live to see the worst of it. But my daughter may, and certainly my grandchildren may, and we have an obligation to make policy decisions now in light of that. As a county executive, with Ken Jenkins as deputy county executive and all of our executive team, we electrified the bus system. Get it off of diesel fuel, put it onto electric. We've done a host of other things, and other governments have done that too, not just us alone, because we see the climate crisis. This is a reversal in climate change. There are legislative initiatives that I support, that other members support. We don't have enough votes to pass them in this House, and we're going to fight for them. And hopefully in the next cycle, where we have political control, where we get some consensus across the aisle of a willingness for some of the Republicans to meet us on some of these initiatives, then we can move forward on some environmental initiatives. I'm afraid we're fighting a rearguard action right now to stop the worst from happening.
I think one other question.
Okay, we've come almost to the end of the hour. I understand this is not the ideal setting for people to talk. We're dealing with questions, and I wanted to answer as many of them as possible. This is not the last time we're going to communicate. We'll look at doing one of the telephone things where we may not be visual, but we'll be over the air and you'll hear the voice. And in that capacity, we can put more people on and have their actual voices being heard. In this format, it would be very difficult for us to touch on 10, 12, 15 questions as we've done. I'm out in the community. You'll see me in a host of different places. Stop me, drop me a note if you want, and I'm happy to respond. The biggest question that I've had to try to address over 9 weeks in this office, traveling to and from Washington. I spent 3 weeks a month here and the weekends back home, and then 1 week a month there is, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I want you to communicate with us. Give us your email address. I wouldn't say give us your cell phone for texting, but if you want to do that, do that. Give us your email address. We will send you the information in real time, and you will communicate with us by email. And now as we start to get through this opening startup phase, which has been very difficult, you walk in the door day one and there's no furniture. By week 2, you have furniture, but you don't have communication equipment. You don't have staff ready yet. So there's a lag. It's not like we've been doing this for 3 or 4 years and we're not responsive, but we're getting there. And if you can use the email function, we'll be able to do that. And there'll be more of these kind of situations. I expect to be invited to any number of other different events and activities where I'll have a chance to see you and answer. If we didn't get to your question, communicate with us and we'll make sure that our staff gets back to you, and I look forward to talking to you. Let me just summarize by saying, I made the decision to run for this position a year plus ago. In many ways, it was a decision that I didn't have to make. I was completing a term as county executive. I put in a term limit. I was very happy to leave. I was very excited that Ken Jenkins would be the next county executive, and he's proven by his electoral support that he has the support of this county. I have friends in a lot of different locations, and I could have said, I'm good with my public service and let me just operate. So I made the decision, and now I'm in Washington as your representative in Washington. I think the way that I voted summarizes the way what most people feel. Not everybody. There's some people who hold different ideology, and you don't like some of the votes I've made, and I respect that there's a difference in disagreement. But I have not stopped working for you in these things. And I'm the same George I've always been. Some of you may not know me. You may only follow the federal issues. You never know what I did when I was in the state and county government. That's fine. We'll get to know each other now. And there's a whole section of the Bronx, which I have not represented before, and I'm new to them. But over the course of the next few months, we'll continue to do this work. We have a tough job here. We don't have all the tools we need. We don't have control of this chamber, and we don't have control of the other chamber. It makes it very, very difficult to do the things that people want to see us do. I'm committed to those changes, and I hope you appreciate that. And I look forward to talking to you back in the district. We've reached the 1 hour mark. Zoom is going to zoom out on us. I look forward to talking to you again, and soon in whatever format we use, and we'll keep trying until we get a format that everybody can appreciate. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful evening.